Everyone to the Delta Lead Scientist interview panel meeting. I now call the meeting to order and would like to give you a little bit of background on what we're doing today. The Delta Stewardship Council, in partnership with the U.S. Geological Survey, is recruiting the next Delta Lead Scientist. And this position is expected to start in summer of 2024, this year. The council consults with the ISB on who to appoint as the Delta Lead Scientist. And the interview panel, a Delta ISB advisory committee, consists of 3 ISB members, 3 council members, and a USGS representative. We have 2 applications currently under consideration for the appointment: Dr. Gary Lamberti of University of Notre Dame and Dr. Lisamarie Windham-Myers of the U.S. Geological Survey. Each applicant will give a seminar presentation on their research and experience and how it applies to the position, as well as their vision for the Delta Science program. So I'm going to introduce the panel. We have 3 members from the Delta ISB, myself, Lisa Wanger, Bob Nyman, and Inga Werner, who's not able to be with us right now, but will join later. 3 representatives from the council, Virginia Medueno, Julie Lee, and Jessica Pearson. And then from the USGS, we have Mike Chitkowski. So here we're going to hear the seminar presentation by Dr. Gary Lamberti titled "The Past, Present, and Future of Water Science." Dr. Lamberti is the Reverend Newland Professor of Aquatic Science and Director of the Stream and Wetland Ecology Laboratory, or SWEL, at the University of Notre Dame, where he teaches biostatistics, stream ecology, restoration ecology, and Galapagos field biology, along with a variety of topical graduate courses. His major research interests include ecological linkages among aquatic ecosystems, the effects of global perturbations such as invasive species and climate change on aquatic ecosystems and their food webs, and the impact of emerging organic contaminants on freshwater systems and people. He has over 200 publications dealing with various aspects of aquatic ecology and has co-edited the Elsevier book, Methods in Stream Ecology, now in its 3rd edition. Dr. Lamberti is a fellow of the American Association for the Advancement of Science and a fellow and president of the Society for Freshwater Science and International Society of Aquatic Ecologists. In 2022, he received the Award of Excellence from the Society for Freshwater Science, which is the highest award bestowed by the Society for Scientific Achievement. He advises various national and international entities and serves on the advisory boards of several research institutes and biological stations. He also routinely conducts external reviews of academic and governmental programs, and he most recently served as a program director in the Division of Environmental Biology at the National Science Foundation. And now I'll turn it over to Dr. Lamberti for his seminar.
But that was a very fond childhood memory of coming up to the Delta at the time with your family, your sister and your father, and having a really nice time for a day, and then having to clean catfish, which is no small task. They have a lot of sticky things, right? A lot of pokey things. So it was a really nice memory. Okay, so let's talk about the topic du jour here. So I was asked to give you a little bit. This is the boring part. I was asked you to give a little bit of my background here. And I'll try to go through this quickly. So just bear with me. So I did get my bachelor's degree from UC Davis, not too far from here. And I know a bunch of people also cycled through Davis. I've talked to today and yesterday, or live in that area. And I didn't go very far, venture very far from home. I went back to UC Berkeley for my graduate work, started off as a master's student, and then moved into a PhD program. So I was in the entomology department at the time. Now it's environmental science, policy, and management. But at the time it was entomology, and I worked with an aquatic ecologist, Vince Resch, who was sat on the ISB for a number of years. So it speaks highly of it. I moved from there to Oregon State University to do my postdoctorate. Then after a couple years of that, I moved into research rank, so research track faculty there. So spent 5 years almost at Oregon State University and worked with the, I guess, somewhat famous stream team at Oregon State University. There, I needed a job from there. And so interviewed, went through the interview process and ended up landing at University of Notre Dame. So, in the Midwest, for a Western guy. And so that was going to be the 5-year plan. And I've been there for over 30 now because it's a wonderful place to work and a very supportive university. So who have treated me very well. And then as Lisa mentioned, I run this, call it SWELL. So Stream of Wetland Ecology Laboratory. So SWELLs and also SWELL. Students like it. And I also created a program at Notre Dame, initially funded by NSF on a IGERT grant called GLOBES, which is a interdisciplinary active now. It's one of those programs that the university sustained which is actually kind of rare. You get your 5-year grant from NSF and then it goes away, right? But in this case, the university believed in this and sustained it. So that's it's really good news. Thank you for attending as well. Good. Okay. All right. So this is a very brief history of what I've done at Notre Dame. And again, like half my life has been at Notre Dame. So 1989, I started at Notre Dame. I was a small child. I just want to point that out at the time. Rose through the ranks. So first fatal error at Notre Dame is they tenured me, promoted me in 1995. Okay, descended again. Elected president of the Society for Freshwater Science in 1997 when I was an associate professor. So that was really interesting and really a valuable part of my training. From there, of course, you go through the academic ranks, and I was promoted to full professor in year 2000. Of course, at that point, the university captures you and puts you into administration. And so from that point on, I was tapped for various administrative positions. I ran the graduate program in my department of biology, and biology is a large integrative department at Notre Dame. It has all the biologists, from the ecologist to the physiologist to the molecular biologist, the cell biologist, the biomedical folks. It's all in one department, one large department. From that, I was tapped as the chair of the biology department for 2 3-year terms from the late 2008 to 2014. So this is the department of about 40 faculty members, 60 to 70 staff, 150 graduate students, 500 undergrads, annual budget of about 10 million. So it was a very satisfying period of my life, and I think we had impact. We expanded the faculty by about 25% during that time. As I mentioned, had this in the background, the GLOBES program, the interdisciplinary graduate program that tapped people interested in the environment. Go back over here somewhere.
Zoom wants to see your face.
Okay. So I think I can kind of see the screen from here. So put this down a little. So the GLOBES program, as I mentioned, had graduate students interested in environmental issues from all parts of the university, from not only science and engineering, but from arts and letters, from the law school, from business as well, even from architecture. So it was a very integrated program for graduate students who would get their degree in their home departments, but participate in this integrated program. So in 2019, the NSF came calling, National Science Foundation, asked me to be a rotating program officer there. So you go for a 2-year period of time. So I was recruited in 2019, and I went to the NSF during COVID. So it was a virtual environment. It was a virtual stint with the NSF. Nobody was in the building at the time, the beautiful building in Alexandria, but we all were virtual. And now, of course, many meetings are virtual, and the NSF still has a lot of virtual programs that they run and panels and the like. But that was a really fun time and very instructive. I gained a lot of new knowledge working for the NSF for 2 years running grant programs. I came back to Notre Dame, and I was fortunate that they provided the chair, the Newland chair that was already mentioned by Lisa. Okay, so, and as Lisa kind of described, what, for my own research program, I really like looking at linkages among aquatic ecosystems, watershed influences on aquatic ecosystems, streams, rivers, more wetland work now that I'm doing, especially around the Great Lakes, and how humans actually factor into those interactions as well, right? In terms of influencing the structure and function of aquatic ecosystems and the important societal needs for water that of course have to be integrated into those equations. So right here is where Notre Dame is located in northern Indiana, right in the shadow, that star, right in the shadow of Lake Michigan. So we have this enormous aquatic resource right on our back steps, right? It's the largest freshwater volume of water on the planet, right? 20% of the world's fresh water is right there. So living in the Midwest and in that watershed, we don't think a whole lot about water quantity, but we think a whole lot about water quality, because that is a continuing issue. Same sort of issues as on the Delta, nutrients, contaminants, and the like that influence the quality of our water. So while the quantity is not a major issue, certainly the quality is. Okay, so this is just a really quick snapshot of kind of the major themes that have permeated my background as a scientist over time. And so it's impossible to describe these in any reasonable detail. So this is just an overview of it. My PhD work at Berkeley actually dealt with geothermal energy development in Northern California in the Sonoma, Mendocino, Napa area. How many have heard of the geysers, right? Of course. Okay, so my advisor at the time had actually was USGS funding to look at geothermal energy in Northern California. And so I latched on to that project. It was provided my funding, and we did some interesting work both on geothermal energy influences on aquatic resources of Northern California, and also a lot of other basic science went into that as well. So that was an immersion into those issues and related to geothermal energy development and water resources. When I went up to Oregon State, I also did a bunch of basic research on food webs and the like, but when I was up there, actually, the forest practices are huge in the Pacific Northwest. And so did some work on forest practices, riparian management, forest management related to rivers and streams in Oregon, along with some other projects from the east side of Oregon all the way to the coast. So that was it's kind of an expansive part of my career where I was, not doing so much like in-stream work, but a lot of watershed related work in Oregon. So that was a very fruitful part of my background. When I came to Notre Dame as an assistant prof in 1989, I looked around and I said, what am I going to work on here? And of course, right there are the Great Lakes. So I said, this is a place I should work and start to develop my program around. And so what are the issues in the Great Lakes? Well, among many, one of the major ones are invasive species. Think about zebra mussels, think about, historical introductions of fishes like alewife, sea lamprey, the list goes on and on. There's always an invasive species du jour in the Great Lakes that you can work on. So I spent a fair amount of my early career at Notre Dame working on invasive species, invasive fishes, descended mussels, and the like. So that was very expansive for me as well to work on a different topic such as that. After, of course, you get your tenure and your promotion, you have a little more freedom to think a little more broadly. And so I decided, what I really like still is working on Western issues and the Pacific Northwest. So when I became an associate prof, I think I got involved in a project up in Alaska, which is, and I still work in Alaska to this day. At the time, it really kind of revolved around salmon biology and salmon ecology, in particular, nutrients transported by salmon in their bodies upriver to where they spawn, and then the release of those nutrients into the water. So fish in the forest kind of issues that, Dr. Nyman, for example, has explored in the past as well, super effectively up there. And we sort of built on that work that his program developed. So I still work in Alaska right now. I've moved around Alaska from the Juneau sort of panhandle area now. We're more in south central Alaska now, around Cordova in the Copper River Delta. How many have heard of the Copper River? Quite a few of you. Okay, so it's kind of a very interesting delta in itself, which is just about the size of the California Delta. They're both about 3,000 square kilometers. Different issues than the Delta for sure, right? Very small human imprint, but still issues of climate change, invasive species, and other sort of global change components that make working in this Copper River Delta, very interesting. And we work with the U.S. Forest Service up there, still to this day. When I became a full prof, I got more interested in putting ecosystems back together. we do a pretty good job as humans of perturbating aquatic ecosystems. How do we restore, remediate, and assist the restoration of these ecosystems? So started working more in river and stream restoration, and got more interested in wetlands, especially those fringing the Great Lakes, where we've already lost 50% of the coastal wetlands around the Great Lakes. It gets even worse throughout, in the states of Indiana, Illinois, and other neighboring states. The inland wetland ecosystems have been pretty much lost to agriculture, but the ones that remain are very important functionally. And so I spent a fair amount of time during that period thinking about how to reassemble ecosystems from perturbation. So from there, as you saw on the previous slide, I got sucked into administration, and so then became the sort of managing people and programs and budgets, part of my life. So that was about a decade of time doing that, and then as you saw, I was deployed to the National Science Foundation for 2 years. Through my university, I was an IPA working for the federal government. So that was a 2-year immersion in federal programs and running grant programs. I was in the Division of Environmental Biology. And so, but I managed programs sort of across the NSF, not just those within environmental biology, but cross-cutting programs as well. So that was a great learning experience. So when I returned to Notre Dame, but I always had an interest in contaminants. So my graduate students had examined the transport of contaminants in the bodies of migratory fishes, for example. And so I got involved. I've been involved in that for the last 10 to 15 years. But there was a new emerging contaminant that I'll describe in a minute that was looming. And I thought, well, we really need to know, the extent of the contamination and where it's going in the biota. So I'll get to that in a moment. And then more recently, in the last couple of years, or actually for really the last decade, I've thought a lot more about global freshwater issues. So, what are the issues not only locally, but regionally, nationally, but at a global scale? And so I think and try to communicate a fair amount about these larger global issues. But let's just to give you sort of one sort of snippet of some of the research I've been involved in, and really the most recent amount of is in the area of emerging contaminants. So I think we all have a mind of what that emerging contaminant is. You can think of pharmaceuticals, you can think of endocrine disruptors, you can think of microplastics, you can think of, legacy chemicals such as PCBs and metals and the like. But the one that we sort of got interested in as a team are PFAS. So how many people have heard of PFAS? All right, this is excellent. So I probably don't have to give a whole lot of background, except, as an emerging chemical, these fluorinated compounds are one of significant concern. And I want to give due credit to Daniela Miranda. She's a postdoc that we recruited from Brazil, and she came and started working with us, and she did her entire dissertation on PFAS in Brazil. And so she has been a driving force in this work. in this teamwork we've been doing with all these other collaborators that are listed there. And then the funding agencies for this are listed to the lower right as well. So we've been fortunate to get a fair amount of funding from various agencies and trusts and foundations for PFAS research in Great Lakes. So it's clear. Oops, did I go by one? No. So I can see that many of you have heard of PFAS. I probably don't have to describe it in a lot of detail, but these are the so-called forever chemicals. They're fluorinated compounds as opposed to PCBs that are chlorinated compounds. And they're really characterized by these incredibly strong carbon-fluorine bonds in that tail structure to the left of this image with head groups. And all these head groups, these chemical head groups, can change into many different forms. And the tail structure can change as well for however many carbons you have. And these are highly resistant to biotic and abiotic degradation. And we know now in the environment, there are more than 10,000 of these chemicals. Actually, the number is in excess of 15,000 different types of PFAS in the environment. Not only those that are manufactured, but they're degradation products as well when these head groups kind of change, although the carbon fluorine tail stays pretty much intact. So there are lots of these compounds. There's a whole family of them in the environment, and these are chemicals of concern. And everything you touch probably has some PFAS on it. If I were to, probably touch a computer here or whatever it might be, or this microphone, there might be a slick coating of PFAS on them. So they're in lots of products, in our daily lives. The one that gets the most press probably are firefighting foams. They're very effective. PFAS and firefighting foams, those are being phased out. But if you look at that circle, you can see all sorts of products, and recently even detected in toilet paper. So, and these are associated with adverse health outcomes for humans, cancer, low birth weight, and endocrine disruptors, fetal birth weight, and the like. So they're serious aquatic contaminants, not only aquatic, but terrestrial contaminants. And they're taken up by the biota as well, such as fish. So talk about that just a little bit. And they're highly persistent, as I mentioned. They're associated with toxicity in vertebrates and even beyond. They spread rapidly in water bodies. So once they contaminate a water body, as you see the sources down there, it's in domestic waste, it's in agricultural waste, such as biosolids. There are manufacturing sources and discharges of PFAS. And then, of course, these are transported through aquatic environments, presumably out to the ocean. They can volatilize into the atmosphere, so you get atmospheric deposition. And there's strong potential for bioaccumulation of these, many of these persistent organic chemicals as well. So just to give you sort of one data slide here, this is a survey we did of Lake Michigan fishes. So on the left, you'll see the concentration of PFAS in the tissues of both prey fish in the Great Lakes. Some of these are invasive, like alewives and round gobies. Others are native, like bloaters and sculpin. And then on the bottom are predaceous fish, those that are eating those prey fish. And they're mostly salmonids, because as you may know, we've introduced Pacific salmon into the Great Lakes. And so that's sort of the top predator, the apex predators right now in the Great Lakes are primarily introduced fishes, Pacific salmon. You see coho there, Chinook, and also rainbow trout or steelhead, the migratory phase. And then lake trout, sort of one native fish in there as well. You can see sort of, they feed heavily on things like alewives and other prey fish, and you can see some bioaccumulation. So on the left is the concentration, that's in nanograms per gram or parts per billion, if you wish. Interestingly, the sculpins were loaded with PFAS, which is an interest. We could talk about that later, but probably their life history and their habitat. Sculpins at the top, there are two of them. They're slimy sculpin and deep water are loaded. But basically, you see a unfortunate bioaccumulation of PFAS in the bodies of predator fish. And parts per billion is not small. I mean, that's significant load. On the right, with the images of the fish, is the relative contribution of the different PFAS chemicals to their bodies. And the blue is PFOS. So it's a sulfonated compound. It's a legacy chemical, legacy. It's been phased out of a lot of manufacturing now, but because of its persistence, it's there and it's accumulated. And then you see the rest of the colors are just a cocktail of other PFAS chemicals. We can't analyze all of them. We can analyze maybe 100 on liquid chromatography mass spec, but many of the other ones, are, the other 10,000 are basically not, we don't have the analytical ability to quantify those yet. So these are just part of the PFAS. So we do have this burden contained in the bodies of these fish. And one of the interesting sort of ecological outcomes of this is that we're looking at what we call the riverine PFAS cycle. And so this is basically biotransport of PFAS in the bodies of organisms such as fish. My lab has been interested in this for a long time, starting from the Alaska salmon work and then thinking about these migratory beasts in Lake Michigan and the other Great Lakes. And they run up to tributaries just like they would from the Pacific Ocean into the tributaries of California, Oregon, Washington, etc. They run up those tributaries and they become naturalized into those systems. A lot of the salmon culture in the Great Lakes is still supported by hatcheries, but there's also immigration into new tributaries where they die and spawn, where they spawn and die, just like all Pacific salmon do. So the interesting aspect of this is that maybe I just use the pointer here, or maybe not. On the upper left then is basically the situation in the lake. So they're using the Great Lakes as their ocean, these introduced Pacific salmon, who, were introduced 60 years ago for control of other invasive species like alewife. There wasn't an accidental, it was a purposeful introduction to replace the top predators we had lost in the Great Lakes, such as whitefish and lake trout. And so these Pacific salmon were introduced. Of course, now they're a very popular fishery in the Great Lakes, a recreational fishery primarily, but because of the contaminant load, they're not commercially fished. But these fish then, as they move, maybe I can use a pointer here. As they move, yeah, that's not effective. As they move into these streams, of course, they migrate up just like all salmon do. They look for a place to spawn in their natal stream. And then the image down there below with the two anglers show a family fishing for these salmon and presumably harvesting them in a river and then consuming them. And there's a big environmental injustice part of this equation as well, because primarily in Indiana and other states, minority and disadvantaged communities, poorer communities and people of color are fishing for these animals, and they're taking them back home and they're using them on the dinner table. And so it's a protein source, right? It's a fairly inexpensive protein source. And so that's an environmental justice aspect that we're looking at more deeply with some recent projects. Those fish that aren't harvested, angled, removed, are then releasing their eggs into the environment where they're spawning. And the middle plot there shows the burden of PFAS there in parts per billion. In the eggs, that's the red, versus a female adult spawning salmon and a male spawning salmon. So we published on this, and we know now that female salmon are offloading their contaminants to their eggs. Their eggs are loaded with PFAS. And so those eggs are not only developing and into young salmon, but they're also being consumed by native fishes. And what you see sort of to the right there, lower right, is a brook trout, a native brook trout, and the gut contents in that little dish are something like 20 eggs out of the gut of this resident fish. And so the specter here is that these resident fish are consuming these eggs, and we know now that they're being loaded with with not only PFAS, but PCBs and other contaminants. And then they're being harvested, they're being angled for, you know, not knowing that they contain a contaminant load and being consumed. And the salmon, of course, that escape harvest and then they spawn and die, like all salmon, are then being harvested by wildlife. And so you have this cycle of PFAS mitigated by the biotransport by migratory fishes, not only salmon, but others as well. But they're kind of the ones that are most prominent. Okay, and then you've probably seen these maps, but if you think PFAS is just an Eastern problem, you're wrong. I mean, it's everywhere we look, we find these chemicals. And so here's the map of, and this is the Environmental Working Group map, but it's also been verified in some recent publications that basically where we look, we find. And most of the gaps in the map are because we haven't sampled there. But drinking water, EPA is working on drinking water standards now for PFAS. And military sites, because of the use of firefighting foams, are a big concern. And the Department of Defense is very aware of this, and they're putting a lot of resources toward monitoring and ameliorating PFAS contamination. So it's basically everywhere, you know, including on your back door here or in your communities here in California. Okay. But at the end of the day, like one of the most promising, didn't mean to depress everybody, right? But one of the most promising part of this entire project has been the training we've been able to accomplish with this. A lot of students are working on this issue. These are just the ones from our lab group, my collaborators at Notre Dame. And as I mentioned, we've had a postdoc, now our research assistant, Professor Daniela. 8 graduate students are doing this for all or part of their thesis projects. Numerous undergraduates have participated in this really over the last 3 years. That's how long it's been that we've been working on this. And gratefully, over half of these individuals are women or underrepresented minorities that have participated in this work. So it's been a great training ground for them. And for me, this is like the best part of this. Okay. So let me move from that into give you a little broader perspective on water science. Hope I'm doing okay for time, probably. I'll wrap this up pretty quickly. So I want to give you a little broader perspective on water science, maybe a little more of the vision part that you asked for. And I just want to frame this in terms of the water cycle. So this is the USGS historical water cycle. And so you don't have to get into the details of it, but it's like, okay, water, evaporates, moves into the atmosphere. It gets dropped onto the mountains, that flows down through rivers, collects in lakes, and then it's back out to the ocean. So this is kind of the classic, hydrological cycle, that we think about, and normally this is like the end all, right? But as any USGS employee knows, there's a modern water cycle now that the USGS a few years ago published this image right here. And it's got a lot of writing on it. I don't want you to worry about it. But if you look at this right here, what's missing from this particular image? Infrastructure, right? Humans, right? It's a water cycle. Here, in like the modern water cycle, is the acknowledgement that we have, other influences on water cycle. We have reservoirs, right? We have agriculture, right? That's occurring as well. We have grazing systems that are occurring. We have industrial water needs and uses. We have urban and municipal water uses and runoff. And then we have more rural water uses as well. So now in sort of this modern cycle, we see the human influence, of course, that we have to think about and emphasize as we think about modern water. Okay, so, in my mind, there are lots of challenges in water science. So this is maybe a little bit futuristic, but really, in my mind, water challenges are defined by societal needs and how we view the challenges and then how we deal with those. I mean, there are the usual array of global change drivers. I mean, climate, invasive species, nutrients, contaminants, the list goes on and on. There are, what the Delta refers to as the co-equal goals, right? the human needs for water, and then the environmental needs for water. And of course, those go hand in hand when we think about water. And I know you all think about that on a daily basis, this idea of co-equal needs. Biogeochemical cycles, we still don't know enough about how elements are cycling around the environment. And we also need to know about, these emerging contaminants and also the legacy contaminants and how those cycle around with biogeochemical cycles. Molecular advances are changing how we do science these days. So the genomics age, environmental DNA, there are all these molecular tools and genomic tools out there to our disposal that we can use to examine the responses of aquatic ecosystems. We're in the realm of data science, right? We're in the realm of big data. We can collect data now faster than we can analyze those data using bioinformatics, sensing systems, whether they're remote or on-site. I mean, it's enormous. In the revolution in data science and big data changes how we think about things. The continuing challenge is ecosystem restoration in my mind. How we know we can perturb ecosystems. The key is how we can put those ecosystems back together to the extent that we can. And finally, the idea of translational ecology, that's really kind of taking what we learn in a basic science framework and then applying it to real world problems. So how we do that translation from basic science to applied science to science communication to the stakeholders that are involved. And those are all important transitions. How to do actionable research, right? That makes a difference. Okay. Some grand challenges for the Delta. These a lot better than I do, right? I'm just an infant in terms of learning about the Delta. But again, I think these are defined by environmental and societal needs. I mean, the big issues that I've been able to distill from what you all do is how to allocate water. I mean, the allocation of water to the different purposes, the environmental allocations, the human-based allocations. So how we do that. It seems to me that there are issues on infrastructural upgrades in the Delta, for example, an aging levee system maybe being one of those, and how we think about those infrastructural aspects of the Delta, and how we meld this with protection of ecosystems and species. Listed species get all the press, but it's more than that, right? It's ecosystem structure and ecosystem function and how we protect those services provided by ecosystems. Water quality is an emerging issue, probably a long-term issue, and I know that's well monitored in the Delta, but maintaining not only quantity of water, but quality of water seems to be an ongoing challenge. There's a relationship of the Delta to the Colorado River Basin Compact and the allocation of water from those two major entities, especially to the southern part of the state, and what the relationship is between those two efforts. And then really, it kind of comes down to it's a complex system that you all work in, and you really needs to recognize the complexity of the situation and the invitation to all parties to come to the table to discuss Delta resources and how to best manage that, both for humans and the environment. So maybe to summarize in one statement, an opportunity for Delta Science is, in my mind, is supporting the best and innovative water science possible, performed by a diverse and inclusive community that addresses really these real environmental and societal challenges that are facing the Delta. So important things, best science, inclusive science, one that addresses these co-equal goals for the Delta. So what does a Delta lead scientist, whether it's me or somebody else, that works in this milieu? Seems to me that it's really conducting and evaluating and promoting the best possible science for the Delta in an objective and unbiased and non-political manner to inform the important decision-making that's occurring at a policy level that supports both the needs of the environment and humans for the water resources of this state. So and I'll kind of end there, but maybe I'll leave you with one quote that I love. which is words of reverence for water. And this comes from the Havasupai Nation, people of the blue-green water of the Colorado River Canyon. And it's a wonderful quote that it's kind of always my go-to. Whenever you come across water in its natural state, you approach it with respect. You introduce yourself to it. Take time to pay respect to it. For water gives life. We live inside water for 9 months in our mother's womb. And then we follow this water into the world. It's profound, right? It's sacred. We depend on water for the rest of our life. Water is life. So thank you for inviting me to the Delta to talk with you. Appreciate it. Your turn.
You gotta sip it. Well, don't go far.
Okay, I won't.
Okay, so now Dr. Lamberti will answer your questions. And for those on Zoom, please raise your hand if you would like to ask a question. For those in the room, please line up at the podium, and our elderly panel can stay at their seats. Teasing. But when you ask a question, please state your name and your affiliation before asking a question.
Thanks so much, Gary. Really appreciate it. My name is Ted Flynn from the Department of Water Resources.
Oh, hey, Ted.
So good to see you.
I didn't know that was you.
I thought the hat would give it away.
Yeah.
Anyway, I was curious, some of your, I was looking over, when you were presenting about your career, and I was really struck by the, different number of institutions, obviously been at Notre Dame, but working with NSF and the institutions within Notre Dame. And one of the biggest challenges that we have here in the Delta with this from respect to science is getting all the different agencies that are involved together, getting all of our data synthesis. How do we work together to make sure our data sets align with each other? Because, as you know, tons of data is collected in the Delta, but oftentimes synthesizing that data together to answer the big questions we have can be really challenging. And so I was wondering if, in some of your work, what your thoughts are on kind of encouraging different agencies at different levels of government with academia and all these kind of things to kind of figure out ways to link up and enable those types of interactions to, encourage the, that best possible. I think because without that, you're not going to be able to get that best possible science unless you're able to kind of take that all together.
Ted, that's a great question. It's clear you're a Notre Dame graduate. It's a good question, and it's important. I don't know if I have a specific answer to that, Ted. How to get everyone to play in the same sandbox, especially with data streams, because of the enormity of these data streams and how we can produce data faster than we can analyze it. But I think that the important point is to have. Oops, you good?
Yeah, I'm just
okay. The important thing is to have the communication, right? That enables that sort of integration. And so, our projects, are not nearly as complex and as far-reaching as the Delta, with all those agencies, the NGOs, the private organizations, the contractors, et cetera, working together. But it seems like it's the job of the Stewardship Council and to some extent the ISB to try to integrate that. And it's really kind of getting people around the table to talk about those data, and it's not just the people that are running the programs, it's the people that are on the ground floor, like actually doing the work to talk about that, how to integrate those data. Because it seems to me with the complex problems of the Delta, you're not going to achieve really great results unless you have that sort of interaction among those parties to discuss and plan the best possible actions for the Delta, right? That everyone can kind of buy into, and people may not get like the perfect result for their particular interest, but it would actually help to actually solve that with good science, that is defensible, objective, and also impactful, at the end of the day. So I think, that integration of data and efforts is so important. And, as I learn more about this, if I end up doing this and I learn more about it, that would be like the first 3 months, the first 90 days would be devoted to talking to everybody and seeing how that best integrates. And then working, with Mike and others, in leadership jobs at the agencies to kind of see how that can be better melded together. Does that make some sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Thank you. Appreciate
Yeah, thanks, Dad. It's good to see you again, too.
Good to see you.
Yeah, you've changed.
Right, so I'm actually not going to be asking a question, but we have
Oh.
2 raised hands online, and we also have a Q&A in the chat. So I'll go in the order I see the raised hands online. We'll go first with Trisha Lee, then Deirdre Desjardins. Feel free to introduce yourselves to Dr. Lamberti before you ask your question. So first up will be Trisha. You should have the ability to unmute your microphone.
Hi there. So my name is Trisha Lee. I'm a senior environmental scientist with the Delta Science program. And great talk. I really enjoyed it. And I love that you brought up the grand challenges. I'm actually writing a paper on grand challenges to Delta Science right now. So it's great timing to hear an outsider's perspective. But I had a question actually about, you mentioned the contaminants in fish and how those fish can be, sometimes there are these subsistence fisher people. We experience the same issue in the Delta, this inequity with access, and that there are these fish that can be very contaminated. We actually here in California, you may know we have in many areas posted recommended serving sizes depending on the kinds of contaminants that you're likely to find in the fish in those areas. But it feels like that's maybe a little bit unsatisfying, that the thing that we do is just notice people that there are contaminants in these fish that you will be fishing here, especially if they may be subsistence fisher people. So maybe this is a hard question, but I just wonder if you have any other ideas or perspective on additional measures that could be taken in addition to just noticing that there are contaminants in the fish there. Thank you.
Great question, Trisha, and I appreciate that one. And yeah, it's disturbing to know that certain socioeconomic groups are consuming these fish and presumably increasing their own body burden at a disproportionate way based on affordability of food and protein. And so that's the rub, right? I mean, food on the table versus known risks. Food on the table is a pretty clear one, right? Feed your family. The risk is what is often not well communicated to those individuals, that you do bear a risk, when you. So I'll give you one example. We talked to Danielle and myself, talked with recreational charter captains in Lake Michigan recently about the PFAS issue. And of course, their livelihood, and these are not like wealthy people. I mean, they're taking clients out and fishing and the like. But they have, that's their livelihood. And so they're taking clients out to fish for salmon. And then if it's if the advisory becomes no salmon, and right now we have advisories on the Great Lakes for certain numbers of meals per month, per week, et cetera. But if it comes down to between the choice between that and abandoning their current job, that's a big issue. And so what we advise them to think about is not only what they're harvesting, but how they're what they're advising their clients in terms of eating those fish, avoiding certain organs. We know, fortunately, that for the contaminant I mentioned, PFAS, its lowest concentration is in the muscle tissue. The highest concentration is in the other organs, eggs, liver, heart, stomach, etc. So eating the fillet is actually better than thinking about, than the whole fish, but often the advisories are based on whole fish. So that's one thing that we're doing to try to ameliorate this problem relative to the Great Lakes, because we know all the fish are contaminated. For those that are doing more subsistence fishing, and you can think about that, all the way from here to Alaska, for example, or literally doing it to provide a little bit of protein on the table, I think it's incumbent on us that those groups know the risk that they're engaging in, and there has to be some sort of protein substitute for that too. Not only if it's a matter between eating a fish or not having protein, then really have to support those communities, you know, for alternate food resources that substitute for those contaminated foodstuffs. So it's a very complex and great question, Tricia. What we have a new project actually supported by Sea Grant and co-supported by USGS of getting out to communities in the southern Lake Michigan region, which are a lot of minority communities, Michigan City all the way through Gary, Indiana, that are predominant, you know, there are a lot of disadvantaged individuals there that are doing this, and getting with sort of community groups in those regions to sort of get out the word, you know, about the risks associated with eating too much of these fish. Or so that's like one on the ground action we're doing right now. There's a lot of interest, especially in my part of the world in the Great Lakes, about environmental injustice issues. There are immigrant communities, refugee communities that are primarily, there's a very well-known one of a Burmese community, immigrant Burmese community on Lake Ontario, where something like 50% of the diet is derived from Great Lakes fishes. And the titers of PFAS in these individuals is sky high. And so that's one case study, but it's a matter of really kind of assessing this, monitoring this, and you know, we have to fix this, right? So great question, Tricia, thank you.
All right, so we'll go with Deirdre next, and then we'll take another in-person one, and then we'll go to Wyatt Moore online, and then we'll take the Q&A from how that was written. So
Okay,
Deirdre, you'll go first, and then we'll go to the room.
Okay.
Deirdre, you have the ability to unmute your microphone.
Thank you. I very much enjoyed your presentation, and you focused on, and particularly on allocating water as the first in your list of challenges. I was wondering, what are your thoughts on how climate change is impacting water resources in the Western US, and how it relates to those challenges?
Well, thank you, Deirdre. Appreciate that. Well, as we all know, water abundance has always been a Western issue. I mean, the Cadillac Desert, right? I mean, it has been, it is, and it will be a continuing issue in the arid West. And the reason, and I talk about this all the time when I give my global freshwater talks, that the reason U.S. has been able to supply water is that we have the best sort of infrastructural system on the planet. I mean, we know how to store water, we know how to transport water, we know how to distribute water. So in the arid West, you know, it's really reliant on these engineering solutions for that. But the elephant in the room is clearly climate change, right? And that's a huge question, and with no simple answer to it. And we know that climate is changing. We know that, I mean, you all experience this on an annual basis. I mean, last year in California, you had, you know, 200% of snowpack, you know, something like that, and atmospheric rivers constantly filling the reservoirs. This year, you're down. I mean, you're 75% of snowpack right now in the Sierra, right? Which is the lifeblood, you know, of, right, the entire water system, right? So you're down here. You may catch up, maybe not. So, you know, that uncertainty in water supply and precipitation, especially in snowpack, is hugely important. And so any models and any thinking that's going to be done about water has to factor in climate, the uncertainty of that, and unpredictability of water. And so that becomes an enormously important issue, not only for storage of water, for its distribution, and then ultimately for allocation. And so no models can possibly ignore that uncertainty, and those bounds are large. And so being prepared for the uncertainties of water, storage, distribution, allocation is probably, like, you know, that's near the top of the list in terms of managing water as I see it in California and the entire Western US. Does that kind of answer a little, Deirdre?
Yes, it does. Yes, it does. How would you see integrating climate research into the Delta Science Program?
Well, my assumption is already integrated. If the Delta Science program does not have an active research component in climate and the uncertainties of climate and predicting those, and there are plenty of models out there right now, to talk about that. But it's not only amount of water, but it's also the associated impacts of that with water temperature, with contaminants that are being diluted or not. So, I mean, my assumption that if climate is not an active part of the program, it should be.
Thank you. Yeah.
Welcome.
But one of my efforts has been to bring research on broader changes in the Pacific Ocean that affect atmospheric rivers on the West Coast.
Mm-hmm.
And recent
Yeah.
nonlinear temperature increases to.
Right. I mean, the ENSO is real, right? I mean, it drives a lot of these year-to-year variations in climate and also precipitation. So certainly that has to be a vital part of any planning.
There have been a recent trend of La Nina-like cool pattern in the Eastern Pacific.
Mm-hmm.
Not represented by the current generation of climate models and may be associated with drying pattern we've seen in January to March. So
right.
It is, if that's going on, we may not be in a decadal scale drought in the Western.
Yeah, well said. Thank you, Dieter.
Okay, thank you very much.
Appreciate it.
Good morning, Dr. Lamberti. My name is Jay Ziegler. I'm the Delta Water Master associated with the State Water Resources Control Board. And thank you for being here, and thank you for your opening presentation. And it's clear you have a diverse background in disciplines that are challenging water management in the Delta for multiple public benefits. Building on Greg's question, also tying in with what Deirdre's raising here as important issues and thinking about data integration. Also, I think we're challenged and we need to be open and candid about it, and data sharing across state and federal agencies so to ensure that that data is not only that we can integrate it and we're all using the same data, but that we're also using it in an interoperable way for different purposes. I am curious and what your experience is with respect to governance and how, as you're aware, every science program, state and federal, could use more resources. Largely, this position has an opportunity as something of a bully pulpit to help shape public awareness of certain issues and elevate priorities. Maybe this is really a two-part question. One is, as you look at those threats in the Delta, so water quality, supply, habitat values, can you give us some insight on how you would prioritize that work? And then secondly, another challenge that we have to be open and confronting is our ability to share data across agencies just in a much more accessible way to the public and all interests around water management in the Delta. And I wonder if you could share any specific models or examples you have in bringing perhaps a new look at data governance together, and how we might be able to once we get beyond the point Greg was raising, I think, and the need to better integrate and use that data with greater interoperability. How do we bring multiple agencies and diverse water interests together to better understand, share the data, and get to governance models that I think lead to better confidence in water management? Thank you.
Great questions, Jay. I do like the idea of a bully pulpit, though. I have to think about that one a little bit. Yeah, I mean, that's a complex question, right? You know, in the academic world, we call the data accessibility exactly that, like data, open access, right? Data. I mean, open access data means you can't like hoard your data. You know, it has to be accessible, publishable, freely available, et cetera. And so any federal agency now that funds my work that's a like upfront requirement. It's like, we're funding you and you have to have open access to your data. And it has to be available within a certain time frame. And so, you can get a year to publish your paper from a project, but then all the data become available in science, in science-based like the USGS uses, or whatever, USGS science-based, or other kinds of venues that make those data available. And so hiding or hoarding or keeping the data private is like not an acceptable practice in my mind. And that's a good thing. And that's how things have kind of evolved. And so number one would be data accessibility. So making sure that the data are available and out there, accessible in a fairly reasonable period of time. Integrating the data is a bigger challenge, right? How to get, there are lots of different agencies that I can see that are involved in this effort, from California to the federal government to all the other participants, the local, regional agencies at all. How to get that, kind of moving forward, I think is probably a challenge, both for the ISB can kind of factor into that and advise, but the Stewardship Council probably is the one that really can help enable that. And so having that free flow of information among those entities that are helping to manage this really large project with the representative from the agencies, how to get that. And you don't want redundancy either. I mean, you don't want multiple agencies. There has to be an economy of scale. You don't want multiple agencies doing the same thing and collecting the same information, where that can be more efficient. And and then the management, becomes more efficient as well if you have people that are collecting parts of that and then integrating that later on. So I'm not sure that's a great answer to your question, but at least this is my view of how you sort of get people not only thinking about, but also effectively integrating those data over various platforms. So, maybe there's a platform that exists that I'm unaware of that can help to integrate those. And that's probably a great discussion point. What was the first part of your question? Kind of got into the data accessibility minefield.
Yeah, that really does cover the first part of it.
Okay.
The second part of it is just your experience in models that have brought diverse interests together,
right,
and really advancing understanding and investigating applications.
Right. Yeah, Jay, that's a really good question. I mean, I'm not a mathematical modeler myself. I work with people that are modelers. I'm more of a conceptual modeler. I like to think about sort of the higher level of data and project integration. And then, the modelers that are vested in that can really kind of do their thing. So I think, probably not directly answering your question, but I think, if you got people that sort of are thinking broadly, about how the different platforms are integrated, and then sort of the on-the-ground modelers that can really kind of bring those data streams together and to answer specific questions is probably a reasonable attitude, kind of the doers and the people that can actually think about the broader concepts related to that. Thanks.
All right, we have one more online with Wyatt Moore, and then we'll go back to the room.
Okay.
Wyatt, you have the ability to unmute your microphone.
Hi, my name is Wyatt Moore. I work for East Bay Regional Park District at a park called Big Break Regional Shoreline, which is just off of the San Joaquin River. And so my role in what we do here is all about educating the public on all things Delta. And so my question kind of piggybacks a little bit off of what you just discussed, but when I'm hearing all of these discussions, as we talked about, it's so complex, it's so diverse. It can get really, really heady and into the weeds of data and data collection and analyzing. And our role is to kind of distill that and share it with the public to create future stewards of the space. And so I'm wondering, in all of your vast experience, how have you seen this really, what feels like can be intense information, be distilled so that the fishermen, the families, care, they understand, it matters to them. How do you take these really scientific high level concepts and make it matter, make it make sense, make it accessible from an educational and passion standpoint?
Yeah, great question, Wyatt. It's an old adage, but maybe it's still relevant here, like think globally, act locally, right? So think about, those larger level issues and challenges, but then on the ground, and it sounds like you're an on the ground manager to some extent with your, part of the world there in your park. And that's, kind of rubber meets the road at that point, that the principles that are talked about and discussed become real when you talk about on the ground management of resources and land and water. And so I applaud you for doing that. And I think it's, I don't know, to me, it sort of comes down to being able to share information in an accessible way that you can speak with the users and the stakeholders in a way that the information is scientifically based, it's sound, it's defensible, but also digestible. And so that information, as it's delivered to the stakeholders that are concerned about a certain resource or concerned about a certain issue, it's understandable, and they can resonate, with hopefully a shared outcome, from those debates about how best to allocate resources, how best to manage resources, and what the future might look like, for the Delta or any other issue related to that. So I think having stakeholder engagement and communication and strong support, I think, is key to making anything happen on the ground, like you're doing. Does that make some sense, Wyatt?
It does, yeah. Thank you. I appreciate your answer, and yeah, your presentation was wonderful, and you're a very impressive human being. So I appreciate your insight. Thank you.
Did you tell that to my mother?
I'd be happy to.
Okay, great. I'll give you her number. Better yet, to my spouse.
Good morning, Dr. Lamberti. My name is Brandon Chapin. I'm the Legislative and Policy Advisor at the Council and also the Tribal Liaison. And so I wanted to ask if you have any experience in interactions with tribes or any of the work that you've done.
Yeah, I like to think that I do, but it's probably not enough, at the end of the day. Where we worked in Alaska, we've had tribal engagement as well, related to subsistence and other issues related to salmon. There and around the Great Lakes, tribal engagement in issues around the Great Lakes is enormous, and it's important. And we have actually some collaborations with tribal hatcheries right now related to walleye fisheries and other traditional foodstuffs, traditional fisheries of tribes around the Great Lakes that we're engaging in a couple of different projects, including PFAS, because this is, a significant tribal concern about that, especially the fisheries that traditional fisheries that they're raising and managing for their own tribes and for others too. And it's not just for tribal members. So those are kind of real engagements as well that we have. We have another project as well related to anti-resistance, antimicrobial resistance genes that are an emerging issue in hatcheries as well around the Great Lakes. So whenever we can and whenever it makes sense for projects around the Great Lakes, we seek out tribal engagement in that and think about those issues pretty deeply. And so that's been kind of an emerging interest of mine, not only tribal engagement, but also issues related to disadvantaged communities and people of color around the Great Lakes. And so that is like forefront in my mind, on a pretty constant basis. So I appreciate that.
Great, thanks.
Yeah.
And we also have a written question from Hal McLean. His question is, what's your stance on the Delta water tunnels?
Well, this is one of the things I have to learn about, right? I mean, yes, conveyance has gotten on my radar, and tunnels and moving water through tunnels, et cetera. I'm going to take a little pass on that. I hate to kind of wimp out on it, but I know that that's a very contentious issue about how you transport water around the Delta, whether you nighttime it or daytime it, right? In my part of the world, we're trying to daytime streams. We're trying to take streams that are underground right now and give them some sunlight, for multiple reasons. You run an urban stream underground, And the local communities, especially more disadvantaged communities that's in their backyard, that's a green belt, right? And so we think a lot now, we're even in South Bend, Indiana, like we piped a lot of streams of now daylighting them for multiple reasons, for a stream that needs light, and also, for all its functional reasons, and also for local communities who could take advantage of a green belt, a stream through a poorer part of South Bend, Indiana, to become an amenity, for those communities rather than, some hidden resource. So, thanks.
All right, thank you, Jerry. Yeah. Let's give him one more hand for the. So we're going to take a 15-minute break now, and we will resume the public meeting at 11:30, in the event people in the room can stay and have informal conversations with Dr. Lamberti. So thank you. All right, thanks, folks. To those of you who are online, we are now going to reopen the public meeting, and to those in the room, we're reopening the public meeting. And we're looking forward to hearing from folks introducing themselves and asking further questions as we get to know Dr. Lamberti a bit more. So thank you. So who wants to start?
I think we're starting down here. I'm Kenny Rose. I'm a University of Maryland Center for Environmental Science and a new member to the ISB. But I've been working out here for about 25 years on and off. And I will say I really liked your answer about the conveyance structure. That was a good answer. It is very complicated. One thing I did not hear was I heard a lot about science, but one of the big issues out here is trust, and it's so easy to lose, so hard to gain. So do you have any comments about how you might go about getting started? You used a 90-day period, for example, but you're kind of unknown out here. How are you going to, do you have any ideas about gaining the trust? You have an advantage, it's a fresh start, and you have a disadvantage, a lot of people don't know you. Do you have any ideas about the team science and the trust aspect of this?
Yeah, I'm not sure I have a magic bullet, Kenny, for that. I mean, how do you build trust? I mean, I think it comes down to honesty. Am I good? Yeah. It comes down to honesty and transparency, right? Getting people to the table, too, right? Having that. So the 90-day plan, if I can totally articulate, was, talk to the different groups from the beginning. And we spoke about this I can't hear over here too. Oops.
Can you speak a little louder?
You want me to get back there?
It's fine if you want to speak a little louder.
Okay.
Can the online people hear him? Okay, I was just worried because I can't hear you. It's as though you're not.
Yeah.
Everyone else is amplified.
If I'm up here, it probably projects better.
Yeah. Something's cozy though.
Yeah.
We can't move these things. Can we get them one of these? Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah.
It's okay. Hearing is important.
So Kenny asked about building trust. So how does this is better at a mic, right? And how you do that with a group. I think it is, and I mentioned this before, but I'll repeat it since other people didn't hear it probably, is honesty and transparency are probably huge. Respect is huge. Dealing with all entities, no matter, who they are, what they're interested in, with respect. At an individual basis, I think that's huge. The 90-day plan would be have those conversations, because you don't build that unless you see people face to face. Hopefully do that in a traveling roadshow, right? I mean, go about and talk to the different. You're not going to hit everybody, but probably the major groups and major interests. You need to make an effort to speak to those people from the beginning. We spoke about this in the back too. That bringing people on, after the path has already been set is never a good idea. talking to them from the get-go about the issues and what their particular interests in. Everyone, is going to have a particular niche, of interests, that they're concerned about, and weighing those and integrating those into broader thinking, I think, is important. So the first 90 days of anything I do, whether it's this or whatever it might be, is learning enough about the landscape that what the basic issues are and what people's personal interests are in the Delta. And so that's huge. Everything I've been involved in, at least since my graduate work, has been teamwork, has been team projects. And so nothing happens without that, without many people sort of contributing to that. And all the projects have been team projects. And I've never had one that I think just really failed, that just was horrible. And because it's always, in your best interest to get as many diverse views on the issue as possible, and then help to integrate those into your own thoughts. So I guess it doesn't seem, it's not foreign to me, right? To think about how to sort of gain trust and build that. And a lot of it's listening. The first 90 days, I think, might be more listening than me, talking about whatever vision I have. It's like listening to those different interests and what those are, what the pinch points are in the Delta, and how getting appreciation for that. So kind of the listening tour, I kind of think about. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, thanks.
Yeah.
Hi, Gary. I'll introduce myself again. My name is Ted Flynn. I'm with the California Department of Water Resources. I'm the principal investigator of the Environmental Monitoring Program, which is a compliance monitoring program for both DWR and the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation. We've been collecting water quality and biological data since the mid-1970s. And I'm also a member of the Interagency Ecological Program Science Management Team. So I'm obviously, my question earlier, I'm really interested in things like synthesis science, working together across agencies and bringing data together and kind of bringing it out to the light, as you mentioned earlier. One of the other things I was really interested about during your talk was when you were discussing things like PFAs and also some of the new exciting things in ecology, things like genomics and other types of techniques. A lot of monitoring, a lot of the science that happens in the Delta, including my groups, is, we've been around for a while. We've been using a lot of the same methods. We've been doing a lot of the same things. And that's, in a lot of ways, one of the values of the data set, right? It's been consistent from year to year, decade to decade. And so it allows us to observe trends and make really useful inferences about the impact of the water projects and other types of things on the ecosystem of the Delta. But, there's been a lot of innovation and things, and I think a lot of the monitoring program things have been a little slow to evolve into integrating those kind of new scientific findings and methodologies into their monitoring. And so there's a lot of examples of really interesting projects we're doing with eDNA and other types of methods, including at DWR. But so I was interested in what your thoughts are of kind of the role of the lead scientist is with your bully pulpit of maybe being kind of a cheerleader for those, but also working with the regulators, because a lot of times things only happen when they get integrated into regulatory documents, right? Things, it's challenging to go to an agency that's tasked with doing something and saying, hey, I know we normally do this kind of monitoring and it costs X dollars a year, but what if we spent 10X dollars to do fancy monitoring? And they kind of say, well, do we have to do fancy monitoring? And you say, well, not really. It's not, the regulatory document doesn't ask you to do fancy monitoring. But as scientists, we know that you can get so much more information, and a lot of times these monitoring programs will detect things that they weren't even designed to detect, because that's just how monitoring works. So anyway, I was wondering, if you could expand a bit on that, how you might champion things like that, if there were any particular types of, maybe emerging contaminants, maybe genomics, maybe those types. If there are any types of things you think are particularly primed to be useful in the Delta, and how you might work to encourage folks to integrate those into existing programs.
Yeah, great question. I guess my answer is don't stay static, right? Revolutionize and how we approach these issues, right? We're in a data revolution right now. We're in a molecular revolution right now. We're in a revolution of techniques, and I think we need like a bunch of 30-year-old postdocs that sort of bring us up to that level, right? We met, right? And there are bright minds out there that we need to bring to bear to this. And as I understand it, there's also the fellowship and grant program, right? As part of ISB, that's in the budget. I don't know exactly the dollars and the frequency of that call, et cetera. But that's also a mechanism to push the science forward, right? And to bring in like new approaches, new views, new techniques into doing even basic monitoring, right? I mean, how this has changed over time, right? We're in a sensor revolution right now where you can get out of one instrument all these different parameters that we used to struggle to measure dissolved oxygen, right? Temperature, that's challenging, but now we have abilities to do a lot of sensing both on the ground and remotely that deliver, all these data to bear, on the issues of the globe, much less the Delta. So I think we have opportunities in the technological realm to push things forward. And if there are specific objectives and needs for the Delta, that should be addressed to some extent in the grant and fellowship program, so that individuals that are at the cusp, that are really doing groundbreaking work, can actually bring to bear those tools and new ideas, which is probably not going to come from me, but it's going to come from the generation of young scientists and engineers and hydrologists and social scientists, economists, whatever, that are going to sort of bring to bear those new ideas. And I mean, the great part of being at a university like Notre Dame is that I get refreshed every year with new students, and new undergrads and new graduate students. And so I live in that milieu where you have new ideas and fresh perspectives coming to you all the time. And the whole history of my lab, frankly, has been driven by the interests of those students, especially the graduate students. Like, no, I want to work on this. Can't we think about this? Said, yeah, let's do it. Let's write a grant and let's do it. So I'm personally very receptive to that whole kind of, don't stay static, work through different. You look at my history and you're going to see dozens of different ideas and projects represented, but those are all student and postdoc driven, for the most part. I go along for the ride. I provide, some oversight to that and some direction, keep the machine moving forward, but also capitalize on the ideas of people that are, that can make the real contributions, and those persist over time as well. Thanks, Ted.
Hi.
Hi.
Thanks for your talk earlier. It was great. I'm Tanya Heikala. I'm on the ISB, and with Lisa, I'm one of the two social scientists on the ISB, and social science is somewhat new to the ISB. And I would also say that the Delta Science program in the last few years has put in a concerted effort to try to bring more social science into the Delta Science program and better connect social science to the other research endeavors that are going on in the Delta. So I guess my question for you is, what's some of your experience working with social scientists? Mm-hmm. And what would you see as kind of your vision for supporting the social science community in the Delta, and also some of the interdisciplinary opportunities that could be there to help study some of these really important grand challenges that you raised earlier?
Yeah, thank you, Tanya. That's a really important question. I'm glad you asked that. Well, I mean, not blowing smoke here. I mean, absolutely essential, right, to have social scientists engaged in the issues of the Delta, because it is a social science and natural science, right, and physical science issue, right? And so without that sort of social dimension and people that really appreciate that a lot more than my background, I think it's important. So
all of our team efforts, you know, that I've been engaged with. I mean, Globes is a great example. I mean, that's actually housed in something called the Riley Center at Notre Dame. It's in arts and letters. You know, we have College of Science and then we have arts and letters. There hasn't been a lot of historical communication across those, but this program, and more so in the last decade or so, has really integrated social science in a real way. So the whole idea here was to get scientists, engineers, social scientists, legal scholars, business people, all in the same room to sort of talk about, you know, issues. And every graduate student goes through that program has to have a social science dimension to their research in at least one chapter of their thesis. And so that's a real, you know, that's a real effort to do that. And you know, all of our recent, you know, almost all of our collaborative grants recently have had a strong social science dimension to it. I was immersed in that at the NSF too, you know, where we had social science. DICES is a great example. If you know that program, I'm sure you do. Dynamics of Integrated Social, Economic, Social Environmental Systems. So that was, you know, I was strongly engaged in that. So not just sort of, I'm not just telling you experiences, I'm really voicing my deep interest in that issue. And I think sort of I'm at a professional stage that I actually can think about those things a lot more than when I was trying to build a reputation in a scientific framework. So I'm very appreciative of those. And I mean, I have a lot to learn, you know, in that arena as well, which is why being around social scientists, economists, et cetera, is like really instructful to me as well. Does that make sense? Yeah. So
we also have a question online, and just a reminder for folks on Zoom, if you would like to introduce yourself and provide some background of who you are and your interactions with the science program and lead scientist, please raise your hand or type in a Q&A and then we'll get to it. This question is from Lisamarie Windham-Myers. She writes, "Thank you, Gary. You shared a great intro to yourself and directions we can improve our science enterprise collectively. I'm wondering if you have any good examples of science impact. Where have you seen science lead the way in bringing consensus to a water quality or supply or infrastructure issue in Great Lakes? Bonus points if you saw consensus with Canadian management decisions as well. Thank you again for your thoughtful talk. I look forward to meeting you someday."
Oh, that's great. Thank you, Lisa. I appreciate that. I think as scientists, we all hope our work has impact at some level or another. And it doesn't necessarily, you know, always translate immediately into sort of on the ground impact and effect, but we hope over time the body of knowledge actually develops in that arena. So, you know, one large project we're involved in right now around the Great Lakes, I kind of mentioned it, was coastal wetlands around the Great Lakes, which are in deep trouble. We've lost many of them. Many are subject to all sorts of problems with temperature, with invasive species, contaminants, and the like. And it's a big sort of consortium of institutions and Canadian universities and Canadian governmental institutions as well. It's a full sweep around the Great Lakes to assess the condition of coastal wetlands around all of the Great Lakes. We're monitoring 200 sites on the Great Lakes because they have to meet a certain criterion of about 5 hectares. They're like, we can't go to every little patch in the backyard. But we're assessing the quality of those and then making recommendations for restoration, remediation of impacted wetlands around the Great Lakes. And this is all assembled into a large database, and you can Google it, Coastal Wetland Monitoring. So I encourage you to sort of go to this database, just coastal, you know, it's EPA sponsored website, but it's Coastal Wetlands Monitoring. And so go to it and you see every shred of our data are on this site. Talk about data integration. This is everything from hydrology to biological structure, to water quality, to watershed condition, blah, blah, blah. It's all in one database. And all the users who need that information about their favorite wetland or, you know, whatever they're interested in, a regional, can go to that database, download all those data, and then get information that encourages restoration, monitoring, whatever they're interested in, or just their favorite amphibian, right? So that's a resource that we're all quite proud of. And this is a group of 200 people that are doing this, including all the on the ground field crews and the like. So every summer we go out as SWAT teams and we hit like every wetland in the Great Lakes as teams. And in fact, tomorrow from my hotel room, we're having our annual meeting, our spring meeting to gear up for our next summer of monitoring. So that's probably, Lisa, one example of sort of on the ground impact of an ongoing program that now is 13 years long. So we're gathering real-time on-the-ground data to inform management decisions and policy related to the Great Lakes. So that's one impact. I'll scroll back to one other example, Lisa, because it's relevant to California. So I've gone from the sort of where I'm at right now back to my graduate work at Berkeley on geothermal energy. Remember that one? So up in the Geysers. One of the recommendations that me and engineers, not just the scientists, made for geothermal energy development, because of the contaminated effluents from geothermal energy from those cooling towers, which is kind of a nasty milieu of chemicals in the steam that's been recondensed, used for power, and then recondensed in the cooling towers, was injected back into the wells. Like it was a simple kind of solution that wasn't employed before. It's like, release it into the surface water. You may have cooled it, but it has chemical issues that we know and we detected. Re-injection back into the wellhead to actually replenish the steam source to some extent, and also, prevented the surface pollution that was occurring from that particular activity. So that sort of a bookends, some of the issues, and the work we've done in Alaska, for example, with salmon has been integrated into how the Forest Services manages their fisheries as well. So I think, there are lots. I could scroll through other examples, but the application and the impact, I think, is sort of permeated a lot of the projects we've worked on. And frankly, that's what students want now. I mean, students, are very wise. I mean, and they come in, especially graduate students or even undergraduates, and they go, I want to work on this project that has human relevance, right? That has relevance to society and is important, and this is what I want to work on. So suggesting just, strictly a research project without, any societal or human often doesn't fly, with these students who really want to do things that are impactful and relevant. So thanks, Lisa, for that question. I appreciate it.
And we don't have any additional questions online, but this is the last call for those online if you want to introduce yourself to Dr. Lamberti.
And in the interest of time, we won't let the interview panel have any more time today, just because we want to give you a little break for lunch. So did we get any final?
Yeah, there are none.
Okay. All right. So we'll close this part of the meet and greet, this public part, and we'll take a little break now. And we thank you for those rich answers.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate it, Lisa. And thank you, everybody, for the good questions. Appreciate that.
Oh. Sorry, what? Okay, so just a few more announcements. Gary, you're free to leave the podium. Well, first of all, are there any public comments on this part of the meeting?
There are no comments not on the agenda.
Okay, so now let me explain what's happening. The Delta Lead Scientist interview panel will go on lunch break and meet in closed session to consider the matter of appointment of a Delta Lead Scientist and to interview Dr. Lamberti. This closed session is authorized under Government Code section as described in the notice, and the public meeting will reconvene at 2:45. Well, welcome back to the public meeting of the interview panel. And I'm here to report that we convened in closed session for the interview. And at this point, no action was taken during closed session. So the Delta Lead Scientist interview panel will meet again on March 11th for Dr. Lisamarie Windham-Myers for her seminar and interview. And with that, the meeting is adjourned. Any comments?
There are no public comments.
Now the meeting's adjourned.